The children hit the footpath like a small explosion. 3 of them, all at once, dark-haired and identically loud, bursting out ahead of a slight figure with the kind of energy that only exists in bodies that have never once carried a heavy thing. They couldn't have been older than 3. They ran with their arms out wide, cutting across each other's paths, shrieking at the autumn wind coming off the Han River like it was chasing them personally. The ginkgo trees lining the path had turned the color of fire. The light was low and gold and long. It was the kind of Sunday afternoon that makes Seoul look like it was designed to break your heart. Seo Ji-hoon had been walking this path for 40 minutes with nowhere to be and nothing to feel. That was the point of it. Movement without destination. Kilometers logged against the inside of his own skull. He had his collar up against the cold and his hands in his pockets, and his eyes on the middle distance, until they weren't. He stopped. Not gradually. Not the way you slow when something catches your attention. He stopped the way a man stops when his nervous system receives information his mind is not yet ready to process. His right foot came down and stayed there. His coffee went cold in his hand. His chest did something he had no word for. The 3 boys were identically faced. Same jaw. Same brow. Same particular way their mouths opened when they laughed. Wide, unguarded, totally certain the world was a safe place to be loud in. Each of their faces was a face Ji-hoon had seen every morning in his own mirror for 20 years. Before we start, make sure to hit like and subscribe, and really I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. The figure trailing behind the boys was slight, dressed in a simple cream coat, moving with the unhurried calm of someone who had learned long ago that the world moved at whatever pace it chose and fighting that fact was a waste of good energy. He had a small tablet in his left hand. His dark hair fell across his forehead the way it always had. And then, as if he had felt the weight of being looked at, because he always had been able to feel that, it was one of the things about him that none of them had ever been able to explain. He looked up. Across 20 meters of gold autumn light, Yoon Haewon found Ji-hoon's eyes. He did not flinch. Did not run. Did not perform surprise or grief or anger, any of the things Ji-hoon might have expected from a man who had every right to feel all 3. He simply looked, with those ocean-dark eyes that had always held more than they gave away, and in that look was 3 years. Every single day of them. Carried not as wounds but as weight, the kind a person builds muscle around because they have no other choice. Ji-hoon's hand shook when he raised his phone. He pressed Ji-hoon's name. Listened to it ring once. Twice. When Ji-hoon answered, his voice was the same as always, controlled, precise, the voice of a man who ran a 40 billion won company before he turned 30. Ji-hoon opened his mouth. The words that came out were not the ones he had rehearsed in 100 imaginary versions of a moment he'd never actually believed would arrive. His voice broke clean in half on 4 words. They have our faces. Yoon Haewon was never supposed to be someone who mattered to the Seo brothers. That was the truth no one said out loud, not the board members who looked past him in hallways, not the senior analysts who spoke over his written responses in meetings, not the security team who would one day escort him out of the building as if he had been nothing more than a temporary fixture. He had arrived at Seo Group's financial division at 24 as a junior bond analyst, carrying a worn leather satchel and a small writing tablet in his breast pocket, and the general consensus, unspoken but unanimous, was that a mute man in a company built on the power of voice was a curiosity at best and an inconvenience at worst. They were wrong about the inconvenience. They had no idea how wrong about the rest. Haewon had been mute from birth, not deaf, not diminished, not absent in the ways people assumed when they saw him reach for his tablet instead of his mouth. He heard everything. He processed everything. He simply returned it in a different form, through written words and precise gestures and eyes that catalogued the world with the kind of attention most people only applied to things they were afraid of. His mother had been the same kind of quiet. A founding partner of a digital startup in the mid-2000s, she had been systematically cut out of her own company by men who mistook her stillness for compliance. She had fought back for 12 years through courts and proxies and carefully placed allies, and she had lost the equity, And she had won something the men who took it from her never anticipated. She had raised a son who understood exactly how power moved in silence, and she had left him her blueprint before she died. Haewon had been building YH Digital for 2 years before he walked into Seoul Group. He was there to study the architecture of a major conglomerate's digital asset management from the inside, to understand how a company that size moved its money, structured its subsidiaries, insulated its holdings. He was there to learn. He was not there to notice the way the eldest Seo brother paused in the doorway of the financial division one Tuesday evening and looked at him. Really looked, the way men who command rooms rarely bother to look at anyone they don't consider a threat. He was not there to feel anything about any of them. He should have left the moment he understood that the danger was not the company. It was them. That right there, that is the crack everything else came through. The boardroom was cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. It was a Thursday morning in late autumn, and the Han River outside the floor-to-ceiling windows was gray and flat and indifferent, and the long lacquered table that Haewon had sat across from in a dozen professional meetings now felt like something else entirely. A boundary, a verdict, a line drawn in expensive wood that said, clearly and without apology, which side of things each person in this room occupied. 3 men on the far side. 1 man standing at the door, still in his coat, his tablet in his left hand, his face arranged into the careful neutrality he had spent his entire life perfecting because in rooms full of people who spoke over him, composure was the only currency he could spend freely. Jihan sat at the center. His jaw was set at the angle it took when he was performing stillness, when the thing underneath was moving fast, and he needed no one to see it. Ji-hyuk was to his left, eyes fixed somewhere past Haewon's right shoulder, a muscle working steadily in his cheek. Ji-hoon sat at the end of the table with both hands flat on the lacquered surface and the particular quality of stillness that belongs to people trying very hard not to move. None of them could look at him. Jihan was the only one who tried. The dissolution letter sat in the center of the table. Pre-drafted, clean margins, brutal in its brevity, the work of a legal team that had been told to make it simple and had obliged. A Montblanc pen had been placed beside it with the kind of unconscious detail that said everything about how this family moved through the world. Even their endings came dressed in old money. Haewon read the letter once. His hands were steady. His chest was not, but that was his and no one else's. He picked up the pen and he signed his name in the careful, deliberate hand he had developed over a lifetime of making sure his written words carried every ounce of the weight his voice could not. He set the pen down parallel to the letter. He did not push the paper back across the table. He simply reached into his breast pocket and took out his tablet. He typed for less than 10 seconds. He turned the screen toward Jihan, who was the only one still holding eye contact, and he waited for Jihan to read it. He watched something move through that composed, devastating face, something that Jihan would have dismantled anyone else for naming, but that Haewon had spent months learning to read in the dark, in the quiet, in all the spaces where the armor came down. The screen read, "I hope the price was worth it." Security arrived 2 minutes later. Efficient, quiet, professional. Haewon walked out through the lobby where Sun Woo at the front desk always had his coffee waiting without being asked, through the glass doors and into the gray Seoul morning, and he did not look back because looking back was not something he could afford. He was 6 weeks pregnant. He told no one. He walked out of that building carrying everything they didn't know they had thrown away, and not one of them watched him go. The apartment in Mapogu had one window that faced east, and in those first weeks Haewon learned to treat that window like an instruction. Every morning, before the city fully woke, he would sit on the floor in front of it with his tablet on his knee and the specific, cellular exhaustion of a person surviving something they had not chosen, and he would watch the light come up slow and orange over the rooftops of the buildings across the street, and he would give himself one rule: get through today. Not the week. Not the next 3 years. Just today, just this light, just this one more morning. The boys came in late spring. 3 of them, which the obstetrician delivered as information with the careful, measured tone of someone waiting for a reaction, and Haewon had given her none because he had already known for 6 weeks and had already made his peace, or the version of peace available to a man sitting alone in a clinic waiting room with a writing tablet instead of a hand to hold. He named them Raiwon, Rihyuk, and Rihun, each name assembled from pieces of names he was not ready to fully give and could not bring himself to entirely withhold, because these boys had not chosen any of this, and they deserved every claim on the family that had not claimed them. He brought them home to the east-facing apartment, and he built a life the way you build anything without a blueprint, one load-bearing piece at a time, trusting the structure only after it had held some weight. He coded through the nights when the boys wouldn't settle, his fingers moving across the keyboard in the blue-dark quiet while 3 small chests rose and fell in the crib beside the desk. He took calls on his tablet during pediatric checkups, typing responses to YH Digital's legal team while a pediatrician measured Rihun's head circumference and commented on how alert the babies were. He negotiated the company's first major infrastructure contract in the waiting room of a pharmacy in Mapogu at 11 in the evening with Raiwon strapped to his chest and Rihyuk and Rihun asleep in the double stroller beside him. He did not do any of it cleanly. He did it the way his mother had done everything, with his teeth, with his hands, with the absolute refusal to let the thing he was building become the thing that didn't survive. YH Digital grew in the spaces the industry wasn't watching. Through subsidiaries and shell structures and the same patient, invisible architecture his mother had designed before the men around her noticed. The company's name meant nothing to Seoul's upper tier. Haewon made sure of that. He had no interest in being seen until he was ready to be seen on his own terms. The day YH Digital's valuation crossed 400 billion won, he did not open champagne. He did not call anyone. He put the boys to bed, all 3 of them, tucking Rihun's blanket around his feet the way the youngest always kicked it free, and he went back to the east-facing window. And he allowed himself, just once, in the dark and the quiet with no one watching, to cry. Not for himself. For 3 small boys who deserved to have been chosen from the very beginning. Just once. And then he was done with it. 3 years is exactly long enough to mistake survival for moving on. Ji-hun had told himself this without using those words, framing it instead as discipline, as focus, as the kind of clean forward momentum that built companies and satisfied boards and kept a man's hands busy enough that they didn't reach for things they had forfeited. He ran Seoul Group with the precision his father had always demanded, attended the dinners and signed the contracts, and accepted the board's approval with a face that gave absolutely nothing away. The corporate marriage to Kwon Soo-min had lasted 14 months before both parties agreed, in a conversation so civil it was almost insulting, that the arrangement had accomplished its structural purpose and nothing more. His father called it a disappointment. Ji-hun filed it under done and kept moving, because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant a name he had decided, very deliberately, never to say out loud again. Ji-hyuk threw himself into acquisition strategy with the kind of velocity that his team read as genius, and his body read as damage. He was the first one in the office and the last one out, and he was very good at his work, and he was hollowed out in a way that good work could not touch. He had tried, for a while, to fill that hollow with other things, late nights, new faces, the kind of distraction that works just long enough to make you believe it's working. It didn't work. He stopped trying around the 18-month mark and simply accepted the hollow as a permanent feature of the architecture. Ji-hun ran. Every morning before dawn, every night after dinner, the Han River paths he had no conscious reason to keep returning to but returned to anyway, logging kilometers against the inside of his own chest, pushing his body until his mind stopped producing the things he didn't want to look at. He was 3 kilometers into a Sunday run when the world rearranged itself. He called Ji-hun before he could think better of it. His voice, when Ji-hun picked up, was a sound Ji-hun had never once heard from his youngest brother, stripped of everything, reduced to its bare minimum, shaking at the edges. Ji-hun was in the elevator before Ji-hyuk had processed the call. They converged on the Han River footpath within 22 minutes. The autumn light was already thinning. The spot where 3 small boys had been running was empty, the family gone, the footpath ordinary again in the way a place becomes ordinary the moment the extraordinary thing in it leaves. Ji-hyuk walked the area twice. He was about to say they had missed their chance when Ji-hun crouched near a park bench and picked up a small paper receipt caught against the guardrail by the wind, A cafe receipt, loyalty card stamp at the bottom, the ink slightly blurred from the cold. The name on the stamp was not a person. It was a company. YH Digital. Ji-hun searched it standing on the footpath with the river behind him and the ginkgo trees dropping gold around his feet. The results loaded in under 3 seconds. He read the first line. Then the valuation figure at the top of the most recent industry report. Then the founding date. Then the name of the registered director. The phone stayed in his hand. He did not move. Beside him, Ji-hyuk had gone very still. Ji-hun, who had not fully stopped moving since he made the call, was motionless. Ji-hun's voice, when it finally arrived, was barely a sound at all. He built this. While we weren't looking. He built all of this. None of them had an answer for that. The Han River moved past them cold and constant, and somewhere in this city, the man they had signed away on a Thursday morning 3 years ago was running a 400 billion won company and raising 3 boys with their faces, and not one of the 3 most powerful young men in South Korean business had known his name was still in the world. Comment right now, what would you do if you found out the person you let go had quietly become the most powerful person in the room? Haewon did not look up when they walked through the doors. That was the first thing that hit Ji-hun, not the building, not the staff, not the 400 billion won valuation he had spent the entire drive over trying to reconcile with the man he thought he knew. It was the fact that Yoon Haewon, seated at the head of a 12-person board meeting visible through a full glass wall, clocked their arrival in his peripheral vision within 3 seconds of them entering the lobby, and then returned his attention to his team without a single break in rhythm. No pause. No reaction. Not even the courtesy of acknowledging that 3 of the most powerful men in South Korea had just walked into his building unannounced. Ji-hun had not been ignored in 11 years. The lobby itself demanded a moment of adjustment. Pale oak walls, floor-to-ceiling glass framing the Han River like a living painting, original Korean contemporary art placed with the confidence of someone who bought what moved them, and not what impressed guests. The staff moved through it with the quiet attentiveness of people who respected what they worked for. A young man at the reception desk, sharp posture, expression giving nothing away, informed them with complete professional pleasantness that Mr. Yoon was currently in a meeting and asked if they had a scheduled appointment. Ji-hyuk's jaw tightened. They did not have a scheduled appointment. They had a receipt from a cafe loyalty card and 3 years of guilt driving them across Seoul on a Wednesday morning. They sat down. Ji-hun, who had not sat in a waiting room in his adult professional life, looked at the chair for a moment before he used it. Ji-hyuk did not sit. He stood at the floor-to-ceiling window with his hands in his pockets and watched the Han River and said nothing. Ji-hun sat with his elbows on his knees and his eyes on the conference room glass, where Haewon was now gesturing toward a projected data set with the calm, unhurried authority of someone who had never once needed volume to command a room. The meeting ran 31 more minutes. Ji-hun counted them. When it ended and the staff filed out, Haewon gathered his tablet and his documents, with no change of pace. His assistant, the sharp-postured young man from reception, whose name tag read Chan-woo, fell into step beside him and murmured something low. Haewon typed a response without looking up. Chan-woo crossed the lobby toward the 3 brothers with the measured stride of someone delivering information, not an invitation. He stopped at a precise, professional distance. Mr. Yoon will see you now. 10 minutes. Not a welcome. Not an apology for the wait. 10 minutes. The same allocation a junior vendor would receive. Ji-hun stood up, straightened his jacket, and walked toward the conference room with the controlled stride of a man who had not yet decided how to respond to being treated like a calendar entry in a building that should not exist. Haewon was already seated when they came in, tablet open, a cup of tea on the table beside him that no one had offered the brothers. He did not stand when they entered. He did not gesture toward the chairs across from him. He simply looked up from his screen with those ocean-dark eyes, patient, even, carrying absolutely nothing that resembled urgency, and waited for them to seat themselves, which they did, because the alternative was standing in front of a man who was looking at them the way a person looks at something they have already finished processing. Ji-hun spoke first, the way he always had, because that was the architecture of the 3 of them. Jihan opened, Ji-hyuk reinforced, Ji-hun closed. He said what needed to be said with the directness of a man who had run a company for 6 years and understood that clarity was a form of respect. That they had been wrong. That the dissolution was a decision made under pressure that none of them had been strong enough to resist, and all of them had spent 3 years unable to justify. That they had seen the boys. Haewon listened. His face did not change. His hands stayed still on the table. He gave them the full, undivided attention of someone who had spent their entire life being the person in the room that no one waited for, and who therefore understood, with precision, exactly what it cost to finally be heard and exactly what it meant when that hearing came 3 years too late. When Jihan finished, Haewon reached for his tablet. He typed without hurry. When he turned the screen, the message was not what any of them had prepared for. You had power over me once. You don't anymore. The only reason you are sitting in this room is because those boys deserve an explanation that I cannot give them. So speak to me like the men you are supposed to be, and tell me exactly what you plan to say to your sons. The temperature in the room changed. Ji-hyuk leaned forward, both forearms on the table, and for the first time since the lobby his composure showed its edges. He was not a man who accepted redirection easily, and every line of him said so. He told Haewon directly that they had not come to be managed, that they understood what they had done, and that what they were offering now was real, their names, their presence, everything the boys were owed from the beginning. His voice was controlled, but it was hot underneath, the way Ji-hyuk had always run, banked, pressurized, a man whose emotions moved like current under ice. Haewon read him the entire time. Then he typed one more line and turned the screen. What you are offering is not the question. Whether you can be trusted to stay is. Ji-hun, who had not spoken yet, looked at those words for a long moment. Then he looked at Haewon, not with the practiced authority he brought into every room, but with the stripped-down honesty of a man who had been running for 3 years and had finally run out of distance. He said quietly that they were not going anywhere. That if Haewon needed proof, they would provide it however he required. That the boys would know their fathers. Haewon held eye contact with Ji-hun for a long time. The room was completely silent. Outside the glass wall, the Han River moved, indifferent and continuous, the way it always had. Then he placed his tablet face down on the table. He picked up his tea. And he told them, in 3 typed words when he finally set the cup back down, what happened next. Prove it then. The brothers showed up the next morning at 8 o'clock sharp, and Haewon opened the door before Haewon reached it. He looked up at 3 very tall men filling the hallway and assessed them with the complete, unself-conscious authority of a 3-year-old who has not yet learned that strangers require caution. He announced that they were very big. Jihan, without crouching, because Jihan did not crouch, not in general, not as a rule, looked down at the boy with the particular expression of a man whose composure has just encountered something it was entirely unprepared for, and agreed that yes, they were. Haewon considered this for 2 seconds and then took Jihan's hand and pulled him inside with the confidence of someone issuing a directive, and Jihan, who had not been pulled anywhere by anyone in his adult life, went, because the alternative was resisting a 3-year-old in a dinosaur shirt, and he was not yet that far gone. Haewon, watching from the kitchen doorway with a dish towel in his hands, said nothing. He did not stop it. He did not encourage it. He watched with the careful neutrality of a man running a very long assessment, and he went back to making breakfast. Ji-hun found his rhythm with Rihun by the end of the first week. Not through effort, through instinct, or something close enough to it that the distinction didn't matter. He sat on the floor beside the youngest boy the first evening without being invited, without announcing himself, simply lowering himself to Rihun's level and looking at whatever Rihun was looking at. A picture book. A small bear who kept getting lost. Ji-hun read it without theatrics, without rushing, giving each page exactly as long as it needed, and by the time they reached the ending Rihun had pressed himself against Ji-hun's arm with the total boneless trust of a child who has decided, without consultation, that this person is safe. Ji-hun sat motionless for a long time afterward. His face, in the lamplight of that small apartment, did something it had not done in 3 years. Rae-hyuk was different. Rihyuk watched. He had Haewon's quality of complete, unhurried attention, that particular way of observing from behind still eyes and returning nothing until a private verdict had been reached by private means. He watched Ji-hyuk arrive every day. He watched him fix the broken axle on the wooden cart without announcing he was going to do it. He watched him learn, through patient and occasionally humiliating trial, the exact proportion of ingredients that made Rihyuk's preferred rice taste right. He watched all of it, and he gave nothing back, not warmth, not resistance, just that steady measuring gaze that made Ji-hyuk, who intimidated every person he encountered professionally, feel genuinely uncertain for the first time in memory. Haewon watched all of it from doorways and kitchen windows and the far end of hallways. He let nothing show on his face when Ji-hyun held Raewon's hand on the walk to the neighborhood park with the ease of a man who had always done it. He let nothing show when Ji-hyuk sat on the apartment floor with all three boys using him as a climbing structure and looked, for the first time in the years Haewon had known him, like a man who had put something down that had been very heavy. He kept his expression level. He kept his hands steady. And underneath all of that careful composure, something that had been sealed shut for 3 years was opening in him slowly and without his permission, the way a window opens in a room that has been closed too long, not all at once, not dramatically, just a crack, and then the air comes through, and you realize how long you had been breathing the same stale thing. The night the crack became something larger, they were all at dinner. Ji-hyuk had cooked, which was an act of genuine effort that had produced results of uneven quality, and Rihyuk had eaten 2 full bowls of it anyway. He was climbing down from his chair when he grabbed Ji-hyun's arm for balance, looked up in that unguarded way children look at things that have become familiar, and said it without any awareness of what it cost the room. Appa. Nobody moved. Haewon stood up. He walked to the kitchen and stood at the sink with both hands on the cold edge of it, and stared at the drain, and did not make a sound. Behind him, through the open doorway, he could hear Ji-hyun's voice, low, steady, certain, telling Rihyuk that yes, he was here. Haewon's throat closed. 3 years of load-bearing composure buckled in his chest like a beam that had finally taken too much weight. He could not let them see his face. Not when it looked like this. Not when it was this honest. He stood at that sink until his breathing evened. It took longer than he expected. The notification arrived at 11:47 on a Wednesday night, and Haewon read it standing in his kitchen in the dark. His attorney had flagged it within minutes, a formal legal petition filed by Chairman Seo Dong-wook to pierce YH Digital's subsidiary structure and expose the company's founding ownership chain. It was precise, well-resourced, and targeted with the accuracy of someone who had been watching for exactly the right pressure point. The chairman had found it. If the petition succeeded, YH Digital's valuation would begin collapsing before the week ended. The ownership story would go public. The bond, the children, the dissolution, all of it, laid out in corporate filings for every journalist in Seoul to read before breakfast. Haewon set his phone on the counter. He stood still for a moment, the specific stillness of a man who has survived enough to know that the first response is rarely the correct one. Then he made 2 calls. His attorney first. Then Ji-hyun. Ji-hyun answered before the second ring. He listened to the full scope of the filing without interrupting once. When the attorney finished, Ji-hyun asked 2 precise questions, timeline and the name of the firm the chairman had retained. He got both answers. Then his voice dropped to the register it took when he had already made a decision and was simply informing the relevant parties of its existence. I'll handle it. Lock your structure down tonight. Don't respond to anything until you hear from me. It was not a request. It was not comfort. It was Ji-hyun operating at the exact frequency he had been built for, cold, fast, absolute, pointed, for the first time, at his own father instead of at the interests his father had always placed above everything else. The line went quiet. Haewon sat with the silence for a moment. Then he put the boys to bed, Rihyun's book 4 times through, Raewon pressed warm against his side, Rihyuk a solid weight across his feet, and he waited. What happened in the hours that followed, Haewon did not witness directly. He knew it the way you know a storm passed, not by watching it but by the quality of the quiet it leaves behind. He knew that Ji-hyuk would go straight to the legal architecture and dismantle it from the inside, cold and methodical, the way Ji-hyuk did everything that mattered. He knew that Ji-hun would move to protect the perimeter, the boys' documentation, Haewon's registered addresses, every administrative vulnerability that could be used as leverage. He knew that all three of them, for the first time, had chosen without calculating the cost first. His phone lit up at 2:19 in the morning. Ji-hun's voice came through low and final. "It's done. The petition has been withdrawn. His legal team will not be filing anything further." A pause. Not hesitation. Ji-hun did not hesitate. Something else. Something that lived just below the surface of all that control. "You and the boys are not going to be touched. I need you to know that." Haewon stood at the east-facing window with the city spread out below him and the phone warm in his hand. His chest expanded until it hurt. He reached for his tablet. He typed one word. He held the screen up to the phone's camera without explanation, because some things are too large for anything more than one word to carry. "Stay." He heard Ji-hun exhale, slow, complete, a sound he had never once heard from that man in all the time he had known him. 3 years of held breath leaving a body all at once. 40 minutes later, someone knocked on the door. Haewon walked to it in the dark. He rested his hand on the handle for one beat, the last quiet moment before the before became the after, and opened it. All three of them were standing in the hallway. Ji-hun at the center, Ji-hyuk to his left, Ji-hun at the end, the same formation as always, except that nothing in any of their faces resembled the men who had sat behind a lacquered table 3 years ago and chosen wrong. They looked like men who had moved fast through the dark to arrive at a specific place, and were now standing in it, waiting, with everything stripped away. Haewon looked at Ji-hun for a long moment. Then he stepped back. He opened the door wider. And when Ji-hun crossed the threshold and Haewon's hand came up and closed around his wrist, not pulling, not stopping him, just holding, just finally, Ji-hun went still. He looked down at that hand. Then he looked at Haewon's face. And the last wall that man had ever built came down without a sound. "Leave a comment right now. Tell us what you felt when that door finally opened. We are almost home." 1 year later, the most watched 60 seconds in South Korean business history was not a merger announcement or a market debut. It was a man standing at a podium in the grand ballroom of the Signal Seoul, in a midnight blue suit that cost more than 6 months of rent in the Maplegu apartment he had never surrendered the lease on. Because some things you keep not because you need them but because they are true, delivering the most discussed investor address of the year without making a single sound. YH Digital had broken 3 market records before trading opened. The industry had spent the better part of a year trying to build a profile on Yoon Haewon and had consistently arrived at incomplete pictures, because Haewon had spent a decade being precisely as visible as he chose to be and not 1 degree more. Now 400 people in the grand ballroom watched in the specific, arrested silence that falls over a room when it realizes it is witnessing something it will describe to people later, as his words appeared on the 8-meter screen behind him, clean, direct, precise, carrying the full authority of a mind that had been building toward this single moment for longer than most people in the room had been paying attention to the industry. No apology for the quiet. No performance of accessibility. Just the words, and the certainty behind them, and a man who had always known that the people worth reaching would learn to read him. In the front row, 3 men in matching dark suits sat with 3 small boys distributed between them. Raewon pressed into Ji-hun's side with one small fist wrapped in Ji-hun's jacket lapel, Rihun holding both of Ji-hun's hands in both of his own, and Rihyuk sitting straight-backed in his chair with his ankles crossed and his father's composure wearing itself on a 3-year-old face, his eyes on the podium with the fixed, unblinking attention of someone who understood, in whatever way a child understands such things, that what was happening up there mattered. The address reached its final paragraph. The room held it. And then Raewon, who had never once in his life waited for permission to feel something, climbed down from his chair. He moved fast, the way small children move when their hearts are ahead of their feet, down the row and past the aisle carpet and up the 3 low steps to the stage, and the slight figure at the podium turned at the sound of small feet because that was a sound he had been turning toward for 3 years, reflexively, the way a person turns toward the thing their whole life has reorganized itself around. He was already crouching before the boy arrived. He opened his arms and Haewon ran into them and Haewon caught his son and held him the way you hold the thing you built everything to protect, fully, without reservation, face pressed to the top of a dark head while 400 people watched and didn't entirely understand what they were seeing except that it was real and it was whole and it was the kind of thing that could not be manufactured or rehearsed. Over Haewon's shoulder, Haewon looked across the length of the stage to the front row. Jihan looked back at him. 3 years of a name he wouldn't say. 3 years of a corporate marriage that solved nothing and a father's verdict he had accepted and a guilt that had slowly become so familiar he had almost mistaken it for character. All of it present in his face, right now, in a ballroom full of people who had come to watch a company go public and had witnessed something far older than that arrive at its completion. Ji-hyuk had his hand over his mouth. Ji-hoon wasn't pretending to look anywhere else. Ri-hyuk watched his father on the stage and then looked up at Ji-hoon beside him, and in that small, serious face was the full weight of everything he had spent 3 weeks deciding. He climbed into Ji-hoon's lap without asking, settled himself there as a statement of fact, and turned back to watch the stage with his head against Ji-hoon's chest and his father's ocean-dark eyes reflecting the light from the screen behind the podium. The final line was still visible on the screen. The room read it one last time before the lights shifted and the applause broke open and the moment became memory. I never needed them to hear my voice. I just needed them to finally listen. This was always a story about what survives. What gets built in the dark when no one is watching. What love becomes when it has to be stronger than feeling in order to last. Haewon never asked for rescue. He built the rescue himself. And then, when the people who had failed him finally found their way back, he made them earn every step. If this story found you at the right time, if something in Haewon's quiet, unbreakable strength felt like something you needed to see today, then you are exactly who this channel exists for. Subscribe and turn on your notifications so you never miss the next story we tell, because every one of them is built for the moment it lands and the person it reaches. Drop a comment and tell us what this story meant to you. What you felt. What you'll carry. Every single comment is read and every one of you who stayed until this final line is the reason this channel keeps going. And if you know someone who needs to be reminded that silence is not the same as surrender, share this story with them today. Haewon built an empire in the silence they left him in. And he never once stopped listening.